Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro. Every week, I interview interesting people who are reimagining work. And be sure to check out our Work Trends Twitter chat events calendar located at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast, sponsored by Together Platform. Today, we are talking about mentoring, which is becoming more and more popular, both in the workplace and outside of it. In a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, experts believe that high levels of loneliness and disengagement at work during the pandemic could be addressed by mentoring. According to them, mentoring can help us stay resilient and connected in the face of these challenges. In fact, surveys have shown that more than 90% of professionals who work with first-generation college students through mentoring and career development programs believe their experience as a mentor has helped them become a better leader or manager at work. Matt Reeves is CEO of Together, a software company focused on enabling companies to run best-in-class internal mentorship programs. Together's mission is to ensure every employee has a mentor, peer, or expert to learn from. Prior to joining Together, Matt worked at Boston Consulting Group, where he advised Fortune 500 clients on implementing technology solutions to improve human decision-making and processes. So with that, we are very excited to hear from you, Matt. Welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. And where are you today?
I'm in Toronto.
Ooh, I love that city.
Yeah, it's a great place to be.
Well, listen, we got a lot to dive into, so do me a favor. Tell our listening audience what a mentorship program is and why should companies even want one?
For sure. So I'll start with the more traditional definition, then we can talk about how things are changing. But certainly a mentorship program within an organization, specifically companies where I spend most of my time more traditionally, is where you're pairing two colleagues together, usually a more junior employee who's the mentee with a more senior colleague who's the mentor, for the purpose of career development and career guidance. And typically these employees are meeting on a particular cadence, like once a month over the course of perhaps a year or even more. However, what we've seen more recently is companies really break that mold and experiment with different types of mentorship programs, but the common thread being helping their employees learn from their colleagues through conversations. As to why a company might want to have a mentorship program, there's a lot of reasons. I think first and foremost is employees want it. In some cases, they demand it. Any organization that's running an employee survey will likely see this come up in their results, specifically if they're asking for things about learning and development or mentorship specifically. And I think this is in the best interest of the companies to listen to this advice and improve the employee experience. Ultimately, this will reflect in their employee retention, which drives the bottom line for these companies. The other bit that I'll add is that, as I was just mentioning, sort of the core purpose of mentorship is learning and development, and I can't think of any organization that doesn't want their employees to be more skilled or knowledgeable about how to do their job and ultimately be more effective employees.
You know what I love about what you just said? I love a lot of it, because those out there in the audience know mentoring is very near and dear to my heart. It's something that we've really incorporated into our learning community, Talent Culture. But the one thing that you said, people are asking for it. Not only are people asking for it, they're demanding it, which I think is very powerful. You know, now that we understand what a mentoring program is, what are the different types found in organizations? Because there's so many flavors.
For sure. So I mentioned sort of the traditional approach already, which was a one-on-one program. You have a more senior mentor mentoring a more junior mentee. They're probably meeting once a month over the course of a year for the purpose of career development. You can really think about adjusting every single one of those parameters. So starting at the beginning, it doesn't have to be one-on-one. You could have one mentor mentoring multiple mentees. You could have multiple mentors mentoring multiple mentees. On that dimension, you can think of one-on-one or groups. In terms of the delta in seniority, it doesn't always have to be a more senior employee mentoring a more junior employee. Certainly peer programs are very common, as well as reverse programs where you have a less senior employee who's perhaps perhaps more experienced in a particular topic, mentoring a more senior employee. And then where we see a lot of organizations have a lot of success in breaking the mold is really on the duration piece of the program. So instead of having a mentee meet with the same mentor for the course of a year and having that really rigid, providing a lot more flexibility to the mentees to meet perhaps once with a mentor if things are going well, extend that relationship, meet again or a couple more times. And then if things aren't working out or they get what they want out of the relationship, having the ability to find a different mentor who can help them on a different topic. And then finally, certainly the use case as well as something you can think about. Certainly can start with just a general career development program, but these programs can be a lot more focused on things like diversity, equity, inclusion, onboarding, leadership, high potential programs. And by changing the focus, that's really going to impact who's participating in the program, what criteria you're using for matching people together, perhaps what content you're providing to the program participants throughout the program.
What should companies avoid when first considering their first mentoring program? I'll start there.
I think companies need to view a mentorship program as an investment. And like most investments, the return is really going to be proportional to how much you invest in the program. And so while it's true that you can start with a pretty small program that's not going to be a lot of work, what I think catches a lot of organizations off guard is that as the program scales, it's going to require more and more resources to keep it being successful. What's particularly surprising is that it's not necessarily going to grow linearly in complexity or workload. To make that more specific, if you go from a 10-person program to a 100-person program, this program is actually not just 10 times the amount of work or 10 times the complexity. It's actually closer to 100 times more complex in certain dimensions, particularly when it comes to pairing, because there's 100 times more pairing combinations. And so where it's possible for a single human to contemplate the best possible matches when you just have 10 people in a program, that's no longer the case when you get to 100 program participants. And so somewhere along the way, it becomes a lot of work and degrades the experience.
Well, and I think we need to compel leaders out there to take this seriously, because far too many, I think, just aren't thinking about it as a business use case or something that's any more than, say, 6 months long, for example. So how do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the good thing about mentorship programs, there's a lot of different things to pull from. So depending on what your leadership team cares about, you can really tailor the message. So if your leadership team cares about employee experience, I would start with your employee surveys. If you don't have one, start a employee survey, but certainly if you already have one, you should be asking questions related to learning and development, mentorship specifically, or at least have them as options that employees can list as a response. And if it's anything like the organizations we work with, these are going to show up as top priorities or top things that employees are looking for improvement on within the organization. And I think that can be compelling evidence for most leaders. If the leader's more driven by dollar and cents, I think it's great to look at the impact that these programs can have on employee retention. I won't go through the calculations now. There's calculators online, including on our website, that can do the math for you. But there's direct and indirect costs related to every time an employee leaves. And so anytime you're able to improve that, there is a dollar ROI to these initiatives. And mentorship has been proven to improve employee retention. And we certainly have seen this many times with a number of our customers. And those case studies are available on our site. Also related to retention, very, I think, important for most organizations now is retention and representation metrics related to diverse talent. And most organizations have goals go all the way to the top, potentially even to the board level. And so leaders are certainly motivated to invest in initiatives that can improve retention and representation of diverse talent. And again, mentoring programs have been proven to do that.
Well, I have to say, what do you think? And I mean, I know that there's a lot of different ways to slice the success onion, so to speak, but what's a successful program look like to you? Give us a case study that you have. I know you have more than one, which is the good news, but what's one that really you think will resonate?
So I think a lot of the success stories look similar. So I can give you sort of our general arc of what we do when we work with customers. So we typically propose a crawl, walk, run framework where an organization will start with a smaller single program, possibly as a pilot. Depending on the organization's size, that will influence how big of a program you're starting with. You do need to be cognizant of having a minimal viable size of the program. Typically around 50 is enough. The reason for that is a lot of the value of a mentorship program comes from the size of the network. The larger the network, the more likely you are to be able to find someone who has relevant skills or goals that you want to work on. So that's certainly important. Once you start there, you can certainly, the goal at this stage is to be learning from your experience and collecting as much feedback to incorporate into the next steps. But depending on your ambitions and the timelines, typically you could do this pilot for 3 to 6 months and then start progressing into the walk phase where you're scaling up that initial program, inviting additional employees, but also thinking about adding on some additional programs. If you started with a one-on-one program, maybe you're thinking about adding a groups program. If you started with a cohort program, maybe you're thinking about adding evergreen and so forth. And then again, trying to continuously learn from the feedback that you're gathering from your participants, and ideally getting to the run phase where your core program is offered to everyone in the organization. Not everyone's necessarily going to participate, but hopefully they have the opportunity to, as well as having multiple programs and potentially even providing the ability for your different functional areas, employee resource groups to sponsor and run their own programs as well.
So Matt, once a program like this is built out, what steps should be followed to ensure it doesn't, fail?
So it's really going to depend on whether you're running this program manually or with software or some sort of technology. It's certainly going to be much easier in the latter. But generally speaking, you'll want to be thinking about things like having learning resources for your mentors and mentees to know what being a good mentor and being a good mentee is at the beginning. You'll want to think through the repairing process that you have available. Even if you run a cohort program, it's likely that some of your program participants may leave your organization during the program, and you'll want to be able to have the ability for people to find a new match. Certainly important to have some of the basics like reminders in place so that people don't let this fall off their plate. Session content as well is a great idea, especially at the beginning of the relationship. Really important to provide guidance on what mentors and mentees should be discussing. It becomes less important over time as the relationship matures and becomes more personalized, but very important towards the beginning. And then, of course, you're going to want to be serving your program participants on a consistent basis, capturing that feedback and making tweaks to your particular program.
Good stuff. And you're giving us so much to think about. Let's talk about how can organizations incentivize their employees to become a mentor or a mentee to begin with?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question and quite a common question we get with organizations we work with. What's interesting is this often tends to be less of an issue in practice than I think people think it will be at the beginning. I think typically when people are asking this, they're specifically interested about how to incentivize mentors to participate in these programs. I think most people understand why a mentee would want to participate. Obviously, it's a lot of it's to their benefit to learn, develop, and progress in their career. On the mentor side, it's a little bit less obvious as to why they would want to participate. But again, we typically do not see this as an issue in practice. And the reason being, not to say it's never an issue. There certainly are cases where an organization may struggle, but that might be a sign of other cultural issues in the organization that might need to be resolved first. Generally, I think the reason that mentors want to participate, in most programs, the mentors are more senior. And so when you're more senior in an organization, you are expected to be a people developer, culture carrier. And this is something, by participating in a mentorship program, strong evidence you can bring to your performance reviews, promotion conversations as to how you're doing this within the organization. As well as if you've moved up in the organization, you've probably experienced some mentorship yourself or wish you had some. And so you want to give back and participate in the program. We almost never see any explicit incentives given to incentivize participation, although we have seen some, I would say, best-in-class organizations tie mentorship into their performance framework. To be clear, this is not mentors evaluating mentees. That should never be the case. This is just as part of the company's overall performance assessment of their employees, including whether people are participating in a mentorship program, either as a mentor or a mentee as part of their performance evaluation.
If you're out there in the Work Trends audience and you want more tips and ideas on what this could look like for your organization, go to togetherplatform.com. There is a bunch of really juicy resources in the top navigation, and you're going to find all sorts of best practices. I mean, there's clearly, I feel like you and I could keep talking today for several more hours, but I do have a final question for you, Matt. What are your thoughts on using technology to keep mentors and mentees connected? Because as we know right now, there's probably nothing more important.
Obviously, I'm a bit biased. This is exactly what our company does. I think it's going to be a great improvement for both the administrators and the end users, so the mentors and mentees. From an administrative standpoint, significantly reduces the workload, and that gap only increases as the program size grows. And then from the employee standpoint, much improved employee experience. To give just one example, if a program is being run manually, it can take weeks, sometimes even months, from when you register to when you get your pairing. And in that time, it's quite possible that the mentor has left the organization. And so not a very great experience when you're paired with someone who's no longer there. Something easily avoidable if you're using technology. So much better experience for everyone all around.
Matt Reeves, thank you so much for stopping by today and sharing your sage.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Work Trends Podcast, your favorite source for all that's new and exciting in the world of work. If you love what we do here, make sure to share our podcast with friends and colleagues. And don't forget to tune in for our next episode. Catch up with you next time. Thanks to listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. Join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitter chat with our podcast guest. To learn more about guests featured on today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at talentculture.com and help us spread the word. Subscribe to Work Trends wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, review in iTunes. Share Work Trends with your coworkers, your friends. Look forward to it. See you next time.